Soybeans and corn bring new corrections this Friday, and Jerry Gidel's new planting estimates for the United States. On this episode, don't miss right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Don't forget to subscribe and like us if you are enjoying this content. Hello, Jerry. How are you today? So let's start right over with this market reaction.
Well, this week's markets have been choppy as they have been in the past few weeks here. Primarily, though, with a negative trend on it here, we've definitely had a big change in a lot of the weather forecasts, and actually some rains have actually made some significant pass through the Midwest here. Interestingly enough, each of the models at times differ where that's going to be. But one thing that's really happened here is that many areas east of the Mississippi here have got some rains recently. I wouldn't say they're completely taking care of all past deficits, but the areas that still have had limited rains and have significant amount of plantings going on this year, North and South Dakota, Minnesota, probably half of Iowa, and parts of Nebraska's dryland areas still have not had tremendous amount of rains. But unfortunately, the investing community doesn't totally understand if it rains in southern Missouri, that really doesn't create a lot of moisture for the crops here in the U.S. So, but that's the feature we're dealing with here, and also the other feature is, of course, it's been the anticipated, or the upcoming, I should say, June 30th U.S. acreage reports. That's always has a little bit of uncertainty, so that's another reason why people are standing aside.
Yes, and I want to jump on your planting estimates. What are you changing right now?
Well, the prices have definitely advanced since the spring numbers were out there on March 30th. Now, those numbers were determined in early part of March, and same situation now. These June 30th numbers are dependent on the attitudes and ideas in the early days of June, I should say. And so, there's a likelihood of some increases in both corn and soybeans from there. And I think some reductions in spring wheat because of the dry conditions up there. Maybe some shavings of rice and cotton, but those two areas don't really improve. Maybe a little in rice, but minimal connection between issues in the cotton areas and what that means for corn and soybeans. There's the cotton plantings in the U.S. are really in the Southwest. There's definitely some in Georgia, but I don't sense that we've had a huge swift of corn and soybeans in Georgia. And that the interesting twist on it, we do have plenty of prevent plantings from last year. That's part of the reason why we had a significant jump already in the spring numbers here, where there was over 10 million acres that was still in prevent plantings from last year. That was down from 20 million or so, or 19.5 back 2 years ago in that. But we've already put a significant portion into it. So actually, I think it's about 6.5 million of that 10 million is possibly already was into the previous set of numbers. And so I'm kind of anticipating maybe a 3 million increase split between corn and soybeans is my expectations. That turns out to be 93.05 or 93.1 million acres and 88.75. Now that's a number that's up 115 million for beans and 190 million on 1.9 million acres. I'll get that straight yet. On corn, and those are significant numbers. per se. Interestingly enough, the other feature that I think people kind of lost track of sometimes in these things is the total number of available acres in the U.S. We've had back in the from 2011 through 2014, we had a big surge of acres jumping up dramatically coming out of the CRP land. And we didn't have any real significant prevent planting situations back during that period of time. But since then, the prices out there and things like that, we really had maybe in the top eight major crops here, we've had kind of a 252 to 254 million kind of total available acres in that. And so the I think that's the one feature in this thing that we've had some pretty impressive numbers from various sources out here of 96 million on corn and 90 million on beans. And yeah, those are possible in that, but I have to say that the one thing that's happened in this thing is that the producer out there has realized that just putting things into production and really don't have a good prospects for results doesn't really always produce much income for him. So in that case, I think, and particularly this year, since it was such a rapid change from last fall until this spring, I don't think there's been enough, plowing of pastures and all these other extended areas that have kind of slipped out of agriculture. So I'm really kind of anticipating my total acres being around 255 million. That's just I think about a million or so over the top number of the last 3 or 4 years in total number of acres being planted. And that, interestingly enough, when I put together the latest numbers from Reuters today that came out, their total of the top eight crops, I should say, turns out to be 256.47, or basically 256.5 million acres, and that's 1.5 million higher than I was anticipating. So it's going to be an interesting situation on Wednesday when that comes out, as to that'll be one part of the puzzle that we'll have to deal with for our 2021 production numbers in the U.S. And it'll be good to at least get that settled, as having all these numbers flying around. That's I think too optimistic about what the U.S. producer is going to do. I know that economics and the price of corn has something to do with something, but the other thing is that a couple things I think the producer out there is also well aware of is that last year his corn on corn yields turned out to be very poor, basically from Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, the Dakotas, because of the dryness and other issues, the derecho, and also the cost of fertilizer went from about $400 a ton to $750 a ton from the time he maybe bought it last fall and decided to make a decision on how much corn he's going to plant. That's the profitability for that last, let's just say 1 or 2% of corn he might think he want to plant is probably not all that strong. And so I think those are some of the factors that might have said, okay, and one of the biggest factors up until this recent rain, and it's way too late to make a decision now about when to plant things at this point, but the dryness out there. Corn takes a lot of moisture. Beans can make it through a drought a lot better than corn can. Or from the standpoint of the spring wheat, one of the primary areas of potential change is in the northern plains. And I know that's down some, but I'm not sure it's like down 2 or 3 million acres that all of a sudden could be switched over into corn and soybeans. So those are some of my theories as to why I come up with my set of numbers here for next Wednesday. So we'll see how they come out, and that'll be a part of what we decide how to go from here.
Yes, I'm not sure you have the same feeling, but for me it seems like there is more and more yield range from region to region in the US and other parts of the world. Don't you agree?
Oh, I totally agree. Totally agree that this is going to be, it's not going to be a blanket decision. As we've kind of known in your part of the world there in South America, is the fact that, we had some pretty good early crop results in Brazil, but the second crop corn, every time you turn around, aren't we hearing slightly reduced numbers? I think there's a lot more in the 90 to 92, and I think that's not part of this report now. By the way, that's a July number that comes out after, I think the 10th of this month, might be 12th, like, and that. But that's going to be a big feature because the demand situation of South America's number continues to slide, and it's not going to be 98 million from the USDA. It's going to be something less than that. And that, so that I think if we just think back to what's happened here from our major players in the world on corn, since we've been concerned about South America's crop size declining on second crop corn, we had another big purchase from China on corn. Even the last few days here, we've had China coming in to be a buyer of soybeans for new crop 2021-22. They're looking at these values and understanding that these are very reasonable and maybe cheap of you to figure out what we're totally going to have for yield. So, and then let's just switch to the U.S. The difference in North and South Dakota, they're not going to have normal yields at 200 bushel like Illinois does. But at the same time, there's a lot more acres there to be planted, or that many more acres that will be impacted by drought than it will be. You can go from Virginia all the way to Mississippi, and you can't get enough corn to total number of acres and yields that's going to compare to what happens in North and South Dakota, or particularly in South Dakota at this point, if they drop. So the impact of what happens there is going to have a lot more impact on our total crop. Now, it doesn't mean we can have a stronger crop in Indiana or Illinois, but at the same time, other areas could be down. So we still got a long ways to go here to figure out what our yields might be on a national basis here in 2021.
And what is the information that you have so far about the wheat harvest, especially in Kansas and other states?
Well, the wheat harvest has been a fit and start situation. We really didn't have a lot of progress going. Texas values yields, I heard, were pretty mixed in that because of the combination of early dryness and then wet and things like that. Oklahoma has been a real enigma for me. I have not got a great handle on that because they hadn't really harvested much. And then over a 7 or 8 day period of time, we went from under 10% to 50% harvested. We're just moving into areas in Kansas. I've heard some variability there. And that, interestingly enough, we've had that one little cold temperature blast that hit some of Kansas there. And I think that has had some impact. And also, if you kind of remember, during the Kansas wheat tour, there was reports of disease popping up. And it's called rust and stripe rust, things like that. And I've heard some people talk about that being an impact. I'd have to say that right now the U.S. Winter wheat crop situation is not going to be dynamically up or down from what maybe the numbers were on the June number. The one area that I think is probably still under huge amount of stress on the wheat crop in the U.S. is the Pacific Northwest. The white wheat that is prominent in the Asian noodle wheat markets, and that is really getting hammered this year. And I think that could be a slippage factor on winter wheat, or it could potentially compensate for some better areas like spring soft red wheat in Illinois, Indiana is probably going to be pretty good. The other big question in this thing in the North America is what's swept over the border from our dryness into Canada. And the Canadian wheat crop in the Western prairies is a huge market, a huge money maker for that part of the world. It's their major crop up that direction. canola has made a few inroads, but I think there's another feature in this thing that could sneak up on people. This 34, 35 million metric ton crop in Canada could be a significantly lower. That we'll just have to see. That's an interesting world. You get some information and things like that, and then we kind of stop to the border, and everybody thinks it doesn't happen, that it's dry on the other side, but it has been.
Yeah, and I think all of a sudden wheat is an interesting commodity right now.
Oh, definitely. And interestingly enough, on a longer term basis, if the USDA starts to zero in on what kind of situations are developing, just like you mentioned, Canada or some of these other areas, and that we could, and many times in the past, the wheat market in the US has bottomed out in the classic 4th of July period. Now, this year, I'm not sure we're far enough along on harvest. One of the old time statements in this business, if you get past 60% harvested on winter wheat, the pressure is switched off of wheat and it's in kind of a post harvest mode, because in general, that means you're past Kansas and the total number of bushels that are there and the pressure of that particular state's supplies on the total going in. Because of course, Nebraska has something, but the Dakotas on winter wheat are there. And at this point, I think we already mentioned that the spring wheat situation, spring wheat weather here, I should say, has been very tough. And there's a possibility that even if it's planted and that the spring wheat, it might be abandoned because it basically just did not be able to produce any flower seeds along the way. So that's one of another feature in this thing is that we got problems in spring wheat, we've got problems in the Pacific Northwest and Canada. So there's issues in the wheat market that could change quite dramatically.
Now your final thoughts, sir.
Well, I think I want to jump into a kind of an interesting situation that developed today in today's market. The Supreme Court of the U.S. decided that the EPA had the right to actually go ahead and provide waivers to smaller refineries in the U.S. And that was quickly is defined to, oh no, that means that all these people are going to get waivers like they got during the previous administration, and so we're going to not have as much demand for ethanol and that type of thing. And the markets really responded to that corn and soybeans, because soybeans has its impact of biodiesel from there. And that kind of confused me, to be frank. The laws of taking 10% of gasoline in the U.S. is still there. It's not going to change. We've had quite a few waivers during this past period of time, and that the demand for driving is going to determine how many gallons of ethanol we'll need. It has nothing to do, that 10% is still there. And the idea that we might actually even have some more 15% blends out there is still a possibility. I use it. I think it's a good product, but it takes a while to get people to use it. But anyway, the biggest twist on this thing is that the current administration and their ideas about green energy and green ideas, I don't sense there's going to be any significant number of waivers for any substantially sized refiners out there. So in reality is that the emotions of today's reaction to that particular court decision, it gives the EPA the decision if they want to provide a waiver, but if they don't, that doesn't require them to do a waiver. So there you go. I got my little soap stand over on that particular issue, but things like that just kind of pop up in markets, and then people kind of overreact and then realize, oh, that's not the biggest deal in the world on the real impact of demand, because that's the key thing in all these markets right now. We all talk about the post-pandemic surge in economic activity and demands and things like that. And that's still here. I know that this idea of focusing on the crop size and how many acres we have is important, but at the same time, I think our demand numbers are still going to be strong. I don't think China's figured out how they're going to be able to produce enough corn for all that expanded hog production they want. So I kind of feel like that we still have a ways to go here on the 2021-22 crop as we stand right at this point. But today we're kind of sitting back and waiting to see how much rain actually hits in various spots in the Midwest in the U.S.
Oh, that's a full perspective. Thank you, Jerry.
All right. Have a good day, Louis. It's always good to be with you.